Hello, and welcome back to the Author Roundup, a special segment of the Book Connection Show where we meet up and coming indie authors and talk to them about their recently released books. Hello, and welcome back to the Author Roundup, a special segment of the Book Connection Show. This is Ray Walters. Our guest for today's episode is the author of the Howard Hamilton Ride Along series that includes the books Cowards, Crooks, and Warriors, 23 Minutes, and Available Time. Our guest is a 40-year law enforcement veteran who takes his true cases and places them in a fictional setting. What am I talking about? Well, in today's episode of the Author Roundup, I am delighted to have an indie author as our guest as we explore the world of self-supported publishing. Ladies and gentlemen, viewers and listeners, our guest for today, the author of the book entitled Inside, JC de Ladurantey. Hello, JC. Welcome to the show.
Ray, thank you for having me. This is a great pleasure. I look forward to it.
I've been looking forward to this conversation, JC. And without any further ado, I would like you to tell us about your book, Inside.
Well, I can't wait to share it with you. Inside is the fourth in that series, as you mentioned, but it's a little bit different than my first three books in that you view a lot more about what's going on inside the department, inside the police department, the Orchard Hill Police Department. And so you get it from the perspective of the politics, the personal relationships, the case preparation, the training, all of the things that go on that translate to the delivery of the service in the street. So Inside is, like I say, appropriately titled because it gives you a different perspective. All of my books are essentially written in a point of view of my character, Howard Hamilton. So you get to see the streets from his perspective.
JC, for people like myself, I have preconceived wrong notions of the police department. And so you said earlier that this is going to be from the vantage point or perspective of your character, Howard Hamilton. And is this book going to give us a walkthrough? You said that it's going to give us a perspective of what's happening inside a police department. I think my question here is this: what are the usual misconceptions that we common people have whenever we talk about police departments or police offices?
Well, I think we get a little bit of a warped perspective of police work from a lot of the fictional writings that are, shoot them up, beat them up, chase after people, and all of that. Well, that's not what happens in a typical law enforcement world. Give you an example. There are over 500,000 police officers in the country, in the United States, averaging about 10 contacts a day. Now, I want you to do the math on that and realize that there's a lot of activity that goes on. So what do we hear about in the media? Maybe one or two items a year, maybe, that didn't go properly. But for the most part, there's a lot of good work that is done on a day in, day out basis. And that's what I try to portray in all of my books, and particularly from the perspective of one officer. He's not me. I keep getting accused that that's me. It's not. It's a composite of a lot of guys that I worked with, that worked for me, that I worked for throughout my career. And so it's a unique perspective that the public will get, seeing through his eyes, the streets and the way he does business.
Right. JC, let's talk about the main character, Howard Hamilton. And so this is your fourth installment, and there are other books that came before it, and they have different themes in it, but still it's because what makes this work of yours interesting is that you had 40 years of law enforcement experience. You're a veteran in it. And so we're going back to the main character, Howard Hamilton. How, because we're talking about cases that you've real life cases that you dramatized. So how is Howard Hamilton, the main character, different from the likes of, say, to Jack Reacher or
Mitch Rapp or Jason Bourne and all of
yeah,
these kind of people. Yeah. Howard is just your average officer. And
okay.
that's what I wanted to portray. You know, you got to remember that law enforcement agencies recruit from the human race. The imperfection that's out there, we bring in to law enforcement. And only one out of every 25 people who apply to be a law enforcement officer actually get hired. So when people come through that process, they come through with a lot of interesting backgrounds. It used to be my hobby to find out, okay, where did you used to work? What did you used to do? And some come from the military, some come from teaching in the profession, some come from the nursing profession, and some come in off the street, you know, just off the street. I always marvel. One of my characters is a police officer named Patricia Wolford, and
Mhm.
and she's a real person, not the real name. But when I interviewed her for the first time, I was a little concerned about her fragility, and so I said, "Well, tell me a little bit about yourself, Patricia." And she goes, "My name's Pat." And she says, I'm a staff sergeant. I was a staff sergeant in the United States Army and I trained bomb dogs. I had 5 years in the military and I'm here. I want to do a good job. And she just blew me away with that, just that brief story. So I had to put her in the book in some capacity. So it's people like that, like the Howard Hamiltons, who was in the military. He came in the department in my first book, he has about 5 or 6 years on. So he grows through each one of the books over the years, have
Mm.
some real personal tragedies in his life. And so book 4 shows him coming out at the end of that and really going into a whole new world of police work.
JC, that sounds very interesting. What made you decide to share this, or what inspired you to write your book series?
My friends, I'd go to parties or I'd be at neighborhood gatherings and all that. And they say, well,
Mm.
what happened today? And I'd share this story or that story of what happened. And they say, you ought to write that down. During the process, I was getting a master's degree and then I went on and got a PhD. All of that required a lot of writing. So
Right.
I had honed my writing skills through that
Mm.
era. I've written textbooks, but I've never written novels, and novels are much harder. Textbooks are easy compared to novels and that. So it was a challenge to transition my mental processes, you know, from policies and procedures and investigations to a novel and make it something that people would want to read. So it became, after sharing stories, I started going home and making notes on 3x5 cards and for years before I got to the point where I wanted to write my first novel about police work. And I look back at that time and it was you know a data gathering process
Yeah.
for me.
40 years law enforcement, and you're getting true or real life cases and you're dramatizing them. How did you choose as to which one goes in as an inspiration for the storyline? What was it tough?
Well, I'll tell you, this is a secret between you and I, but Howard told me I didn't have to come up with this. He got into my head so much that he said, okay, here's how I want to start this book. And he would tell me in my brain, I would think about, okay, how am I going to start this? And what's going to be, I wanted to give a storyline of real police work and how it's done. Like in 23 minutes, there's a scenario of him training a brand new officer.
Mhm.
And in that, he trains him how to do a traffic stop, a simple traffic stop. It takes him step by step through that process. So my goal is to educate people as to how you police officers go about their work, why
Mm,
they do what they do, and
mm,
and how they want to go home every night. They don't want to get wet. They want to have lunch, and they don't want to get their uniform dirty. So most officers want to go out there and just do good, solid police work, solve problems, protect their communities. And so he was in my head that way. So
mm,
my first book, I always wanted to put large cases inside each
mhm.
book and build
Okay.
around it. So my first book, I built an investigation into a satanic cult. My second book, I built into a drug cartel. The third book, I built into around the killing of two officers that I happened to be at the scene of shortly thereafter, and
Mm,
how that all the storyline behind that. And then my fourth book was again more about the politics of an agency, the personal relationships that police officers have, and then in there, another drug cartel
mm.
investigation. So, because I wanted to give a different perspective of how drug cartels work, and I did that inside. And as a result, I think it told a lot of different stories throughout.
How long did it take you to write each book? Did it take you like years to complete it?
Each book, I always thought that by the time I got to my third or fourth book, it'd be easier. It isn't. But each book took about a year
Okay.
to write. Then you go through editing processes
Mm,
ad nauseum. I mean, one after another. You search for beta readers, you look for people, and then you find an editor that you're comfortable with and you want to work with, and then you work with them. That
mm,
takes months to go
mm.
through that process. Most of my books are over 300 pages, so I have to have the patience to work with an editor to get it to that final place.
What's the fun part when you were writing your books?
The fun part was just sitting down and writing it. I never had writer's block
Oh, okay.
because he always told me what he wanted to do. And it just kind of flowed as I sat down and typed things out. And his story, I was right there with him. It was like I was his partner sometimes. And
Mm,
we would see things together. And then the stories would flash in my mind as to what I wanted to do, whether it's how to work with an officer that he discovers is selling drugs on the side, how he
mm.
handles that, to how he deals with informants, to how he deals with training a new officer. So and then I don't want to give up too much of the information, but in my third book, he loses his wife and how that impacts him personally and his family. He has two teenage kids and how that impacts his life.
Let's go to the opposite of the fun part. You said you never had any writer's block because the ideas are just flowing in continuously. But what aside from writer's block, what made the writing difficult for you? What was the challenging part in completing your work?
I don't have a lot of patience.
Mm.
And the editing process is so grueling and so time consuming that
Right.
it started really bothering me. And I understand because editors have a lot of things that they have to look at. I
Mhm.
thought I was doing pretty good as a writer. I use Grammarly. I thought I knew how to write and all that. But by the time I got the editing process back, I could not believe the number of mistakes that I had made in the manuscript. They saw them because they have new eyes.
Right.
It was my patience that was the negative part. Where is that? I kept, gosh, why can't they just turn that around quickly? I did a good job. Well, quite frankly, that's why we have editors in the world. And I didn't appreciate it until I got into it.
That was that the time you realized that technical writing was far easier for you to do than creative writing, delving into the fictionalization of storytelling and writing this book.
Yeah, dialogue did not come easy. There's no dialogue in textbooks. And,
Right.
and so you had to create, I had to go to school, to Author Learning Center,
Mm,
and other places to look at how to write dialogue because it didn't come easy. And you have to have a separate voice for each character. You can't just write
right.
just the
Right.
same words that your main character would write
Right.
that a bad guy would say. So you have to come up with a lot of different ways of presenting it. And
Mm,
and again, that's where editors make their money. They help you.
right. You're and now I just realized it when you're writing a dialogue, you're right. You cannot have just one voice because that's how readers will pick up on their character. Like that's going to define their character. This is a bad guy, but this bad guy sounds like the main character. And okay, now I understand that the dialogue part was challenging for you. Did it frustrate you that much, or was it just a learning process?
It was just a learning process. After a while, I got to where I was comfortable with it.
Right.
Formatting is so important because when you
Was
format, you see it differently. I do a lot of beta reading for other authors. And
mm,
when you do, you see that they kind of hide the dialogue within a paragraph. And you don't want
mm,
to do that. You want to bring it out. And again, it was a learning curve from the first book to the fourth book. And I'm sure whatever comes in the future.
right. And this is very interesting. I've talked to a lot of authors in the course of the show, and most of them would actually agree with you in terms of because I'm talking to professionals like yourself, like they have 30, 25 years in the academe. So, but they never really considered writing a novel or a fiction book. Everything they wrote during their career was all about textbooks, exams, reports to comply with an ISO. And for them, it's like a walk in the park. And then the real challenge came in when they started writing a novel and they realized that there's this dialogue part that's really challenging. And only a few of these authors are able to voice it out or even tell us during this show. And you're actually one of them. That's very insightful, JC. Thank you so much for that. You said earlier that you got inspired by your friends because you attend parties and you share these stories and they encourage you to write it. Apart from these nice feedback that you're getting, this is your fourth book. What feedback, nice feedback, did you receive so far in those three books that were sort of like a prelude to this current book that you have?
Well, I looked at some of the reviews on Amazon for my books, and I think that I got reinforcement because they said essentially that they've never read a book where they felt like the writer knew what they were talking about
Right,
in terms of getting the information out. I'm not explaining that very well, but that this is one of the first books where this is real stories. It isn't,
right.
it isn't, I call it nonfiction fiction. It's a
Mm,
combination of fiction and nonfiction because it's one of those things where I expose a lot of the police procedures. And
mm,
me, that's fine. People need to know how agencies go about doing what they do, how they deliver service. The
right,
simple things like a police officer deciding which car he wants to pick when he goes out on patrol. And the internal fight inside to get the right car. Simple stuff like that. But if you think about it, that translates to him being comfortable on the street because he wants this certain car and he has to fight to get it each and every day. So all of these different things that happen that I tried to put out there so that readers would understand the true nature of police work.
I can now imagine myself reading your book, going through the pages of it and reading through it and just, thinking, talking to myself, saying things like, oh, so this is what's happening in behind the scenes when you're a police officer. Oh, so this is because this is based in real life scenario and not yeah, I'm not given the same level of that opportunity when I'm reading other books. There are lots of series being released on TV right now based on books. Others are not. But when let's just compare it with watching these series, you would, as a viewer, you would more often than not ask yourself, is this really happening in real life? Is this how they work? Seriously. And so your book is going to, when we read it, we're not going to have to go through that argument, like be skeptical and say something like, seriously, is this really what's happening behind the scenes?
No, I wanted to put
Right.
the reader in the front seat of Howard Hamilton's car, and
This is going to be
and kind
interesting.
of see things the way he did, see the thought processes and everything. At least in my first few books, he goes into a different assignment in
Hmm.
book four that takes him into a whole new world, the cybersecurity and all that stuff. So you have to read it. I can't tell you everything about it. You have to read inside.
Right. And we're going to go through each title of your four books. You have a fifth book coming in, but I'm going to let you talk about that a little later. But before we go through that part, I would want to ask for more advice from you. Some of our viewers and listeners are aspiring writers. They could probably be working on their first book. What advice can you give from a published author to someone who is aspiring to become published?
Well, take some time to gather your thoughts, write them down. You don't have to write down everything that you want. You just make an outline.
Right.
I was comfortable with 3x5 cards. Just jot down ideas, jot down concepts or an incident, and just throw it in a box in that. And then sit back and say, okay, where is this going? And then would recommend you get those cards out and you almost do a storyboard like they do, like the way they make a movie. That, okay, let's put this incident over here, let's put that incident here, let's put that incident here, let's add this character here. And that's all before you write. Before you write. Then I highly recommend, if you don't have that writing skill honed, that you do take some classes. There's some great online classes. I recommend Author Learning Center. I recommend Masterclass, all of those different classes where you get to listen to authors in the background of how they go about writing. One of my favorites is Dan Brown, and the books. And if you listen to him explain how he went about writing his books, it's a textbook, and so you see that there's a lot of time spent before you start, and then you get going and you do your drafts. My discipline was to sit down for 4 hours a day from 6 in the morning to about 10 o'clock in the morning, and then walk away after I've gotten so much. I don't know, might have been 1,000 words or so, 1,500, and then I just walk away. And then I come
Mm.
back and take a look again at what I did, and then, okay, continue. Then you work your way to the end and you write those 2 words that every author would love, the end. Well, I always tell every author, when you get to the end, you've just begun. That is the beginning of your book. When you have written those 2 words, that is the beginning of your book. And you go back and you will find that you will take things out, cut things out that are superfluous. You will find that you'll shrink things down. You'll find that you'll add things. There's so much to it. You'll move things around. You'll change the scenario and that. So be comfortable with spending a lot of time on your book. That's why 1 year is not unreasonable in
Mm.
writing a book. So I know there's authors out there that crank out 2 or 3 a year. Well, but they're not, they may not be, they may or may not be the quality that
I agree.
some of us do, but we put a lot of effort into it. And that's what I would encourage. Put a lot of effort into it. Don't be afraid to share it with your friends. Look for professional beta readers to help you. Join
Mm,
writers groups, join author groups from different places, even if it's just online, and spend some time submerged in your new discipline that you find. Spend some time just studying it so that you know. I have had an incredible learning curve going through this process. And iUniverse has been a big part of that learning curve. But overall, I have to say that it's been quite a journey. And just stick with it. The biggest reward that you will get as a writer is when your book is delivered to your house and you open up that package and you see
mm,
that book for the very first time. It's
mm.
like giving birth. It is like having a new baby. It is your baby. So spend the time to make sure that what you're going to produce is worth that.
Thank you so much for that, JC. I have a follow-up question. This is out of my curiosity. Which was easier for you to do, starting out a story or ending it?
It was easier to start it out. I wasn't sure where to end it. Like in Inside, I ended it with the idea that, there's a lot more coming. You
Right,
know,
right, right.
it's one of those. And with my chapters, I went to the James Patterson School where they're short chapters. And at the
Mm,
end of each chapter, you want to get to the next chapter. There's that movement that you want to get to.
right.
And so I think that that's what I wanted to do with this book.
Mm,
And I'll be frank with you, I don't know if I have another book in me, another Howard Hamilton book. I'm not sure if I do, but if I do, it'll come along and
mm.
and everything will click and I'll have fun with it. But right now, I want to enjoy Inside. It's only been out a couple months.
And and I agree with you. And with what you said earlier, I kind of like the line where I was also thinking when you said that, just write it down and walk away. And it's like, wow, that's really nice for one author to continue moving on is you sometimes walk away, but you don't forget to go back. And that's a very powerful message. In terms of the ending, you're just talking about creating that ending. Did you have like sort of a debate that, oh, this is how I'm going to end it? Oh, no, maybe this is how I'm going to end it. Is that a perfect ending? I mean, how do we end stories when we're writing a book?
I knew what my ending was going to be when I started writing the book. So I planted seeds
Mm,
in the storylines. But when you read it, you won't realize what the outcome is going to be. And it has nothing to do with the big drug cartel case that he's working on. But you will see it. Once you see it, you'll go back and you go, oh, now I see how that all works together. So, but you have to read it. I can't tell you everything.
right, right, right. And I also I'm agreeing with you when you said that you wanted to create a book that pulls you in. Like once you're done with the first chapter, there's always this urge to continue reading because as a reader myself, that's what I go through. I've had several books in the past that I've read that are for me really a darling to my heart. And it's a pattern that readers would usually go through. Like, oh, this is a thick book, especially if you like the story. This is a thick book. This is nice. And then you read through it and you can't. Sometimes I'd probably check my watch and the next thing I know, it's already 3 a.m. in the morning. I'm still pinned on the book. But it saddens me also knowing that I only have a few chapters left. So I need to slow down in the reading. And that's a very nice goal to have as an author and as a reader. That's the kind of experience I want to have too. When I'm reading books, it should pull me in so much, but because it makes me look forward to the sequel of the book. What's going to happen next? am I going to wait another year before this author is going to come up with another book? But the wait is really nice. And I would rather, as a reader, wait that long because you know that that book is going to be nice. It's hard, it's hard reading a book that has lots of loopholes in it. Because when a reader is so engrossed with the story, they're very particular and familiar with the character and what the character is doing, some of the rules perhaps in the content that the storyline is saying. But then again, this is supposed to be like an absolute rule, and later on in the story it got broken. But it's supposed to be an absolute rule that nobody should, like, say it's bulletproof. It's so bulletproof, this vest is so bulletproof that there's no bullet created yet, it's going to penetrate it. But when you get to the story, later part of the story, something happened and the rule got broken. And as a reader, when we are so engrossed with what we read, we tend to capture that. And so those are the kind of books that I really want to read. And
I've had feedback from different readers where they said, I I want to put it down, but you left me hanging on that thing. I had to get to the next chapter. So they finished the book in like 2 or 3 settings, because
Mm,
they couldn't just walk away from it. I have books like you talk about the very thick ones, the Frederick Forsyth books, 1,100 pages or whatever, that they're good books, but you're on a journey. And I think every genre of book has a different audience. And
mm,
some audiences just want a good story. And then
right.
some people want to be educated. And that's what I always call it edutainment. I want to
Mm.
educate, I want to train the public, and I want to entertain them. So it's an edutainment process that I go through in every book to teach the public about.
Let's go to the fun part of this interview. JC, I know you have goals you've set for this year, be it personal, but let's focus on the book itself. By the way, do you have a copy of your book you might want to go ahead and
I
show?
just happen to.
So that's the fourth book inside.
Yes. And I'm pretty excited about the cover. I thought that my graphics designer did an incredible job with it
It's a beautiful book.
because I wanted to tell the story on the cover. All my books tell their story on the cover. And so what you have is a big building that is muted in the background, which is, it depicts a police department. And then the magnifying glass permits you to focus more clearly on the building. And then the
Right.
helicopter and the moon and all that tells the story of the drug cartel investigation and everything that goes on with the storyline. But it was a lot. It took 2 weeks, believe it or not, to design this book cover, just the book cover. So, but because I had such great graphic design people, they worked with me. They sent me different mock-ups, and it just became one of the most satisfying parts of the writing process.
You truly, well, what makes me pick up a good book? I would have to say this is just my preference.
Yeah,
It's the cover.
yeah,
I do not always agree that you cannot judge a book by its cover.
yeah. This one, I hope you can.
That's a very beautiful cover. JC, going back to the question, what are your personal professional goals? You have 4 books now. What are your
Well,
plans this year?
I do. I'm working on a 5th book, but it is not a sequel to my Howard Hamilton series. It's my memoirs,
Mm,
which is totally some of the things are from the book, but most from my books, but most of it is not. I go back to the beginning of my career and all of that, and follow it forward with my family and all of that. So that memoir is it's at the editors right now, so I'm kind of waiting for it. And then I'm working on something totally different, a book. And that was inspired more by my writing group, the writers group that I'm involved with. And so we'll see where that goes. But writing is almost cathartic.
Uh-huh.
It's almost that ability to get things out, and it keeps you motivated. It keeps you thinking, oh, what am I going to do the next day and the day after that? I'm not a youngster. I'm an old guy. So what am I going to do to keep myself moving forward? And it's this writing process that really helps do that. Do I have another Howard Hamilton book? It's starting to form up here. He's starting to talk to me and that, but I haven't written anything. Well, I've written a few notes, but I haven't done anything real sophisticated yet with it. So we'll see.
Do you have a website we can visit, check out?
Yes, I'm very excited about my website. It's very simple, jcdeladurantey.com. And you take a look at it, and my books just jump right out at you. And one of the other things that I did in the website is I put some blogs in there, and it's Howard Hamilton's perspective on things, his perspective on TV shows, his perspective on
Mm,
traffic stops, and
mm,
how he thinks about those things. So
mhm.
there's a lot of different perspectives that I tried to get across so that people start reading about how police officers think, you know.
Right.
So you'll find some of that on the website, and you'll find some of my reviews. So like I say, I'm pretty excited about the website.
We're very much excited to check it out too. If in case they want to go ahead and reach you, in any emails, business emails you have where you allow people to reach out to you and talk to you about
Absolutely.
your book.
Absolutely. I love talking to my readers. I get emails a lot from the people that I know. I do a lot of book signings. Barnes and Noble in my community has been very good. And so I end up doing a lot of book signings. So I develop good readers lists and all that. So you can email me at jc.del, D-E-L, the number one, at outlook.com. That's jc.del, the number one, at outlook.com. And
Right.
I'll try to respond to you within the 24 hours, and we'll have a conversation. And if you have questions about why did I put this in this book and why did I do this, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
JC, don't keep us hanging. Where can we get a copy of your book? So you have 4 books. You have Cowards, Crooks, and Warriors, 23 minutes and available time. And your recent one is Inside. Where can we get a copy of these books of yours?
Well, a number of different places. It's on iUniverse's, my publisher's website. It's
Mhm.
on Amazon all over the place. It's on barnesandnoble.com. You can also get it through my website, but I think it's wherever books are sold online right now. And a few of the Barnes and Nobles are starting to keep the hard copies in there because they do get a demand for it. But I
Mm.
do have a following, and so when I get a signing, I have all my friends swarm the store, you know, and they buy up a lot of other books, not just
Uh,
my book, but they buy up a lot of other things. So it's beneficial for anybody who wants to read.
and so your book is available in hardback, paperback, and ebook, I presume.
Yes. And my first
It's
two
great.
books are also available on audio. I did a
Oh,
narration of the
nice.
first two books, and they're available. I have not gotten time to do available time and inside, but that's something else on my bucket list to do to get done.
All right. Well, JC, I'm wishing for the best to you in all the endeavors that you have and all your plans that you have for this year. It's a pleasure having here for this particular episode in our show, JC. I hope you also enjoyed your time with us.
Ray, this has been a great conversation, I have to say. You made it very comfortable for me, and I really appreciate that. And I look forward to perhaps doing this again sometime.
Yes, that's what I'm about to tell you, actually. You have an upcoming book, and if you are still planning to write more real life stories dramatized in the character, fictionalized character, Howard Hamilton, we're going to talk again, definitely. All right. So yeah, I would also like to thank our viewers and listeners for staying with us all throughout this conversation. Now, before you guys go, show some love by subscribing to our channel. Stay tuned for our next interview on the Book Connection Show, where we meet extraordinary indie voices with incredible stories. Again, this is Ray Walters. Join me next time as we explore the world of self-supported publishing, one indie author at a time.